pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth!
The world watched in stunned silence the night one of Hollywood's most beloved stars stepped onto the Academy Awards stage and did something nobody could have imagined. Millions of people were watching live when Will Smith walked up and struck comedian Chris Rock across the face, in front of every camera, every celebrity, and every viewer tuned in around the globe. It wasn't a stunt, it wasn't scripted, and it wasn't just a moment. It was a rupture in the carefully polished image Hollywood has spent decades building for itself and for the people it protects. Chris Rock had made a joke comparing Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head to a military film character, not knowing it would land the way it did. What followed was captured from every angle. Will returning to his seat, shouting across the auditorium, while the audience sat frozen somewhere between disbelief and confusion. Many watching at home thought it had to be part of the show. Then the reality set in. And then came the moment that turned everything from shocking to deeply disturbing. Will Smith won Best Actor that same night for his role in King Richard, walked onto that very stage, and received a standing ovation from the same room where the incident had just happened. That standing ovation became the real story, not the strike itself, but the applause, because it forced a question nobody in Hollywood wanted to answer out loud. What does it mean when an industry that calls itself the moral and cultural center of storytelling stands up and claps for someone who just committed a public act of aggression? That question didn't fade, it grew louder. And two voices in particular cut straight through the noise. Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy, two of the most experienced and sharp-minded figures in the entertainment world, who chose to speak openly and honestly when almost everyone else stayed quiet. Jim Carrey appeared on CBS Mornings just 3 days after the ceremony and didn't hold back. He said he was sickened, not just by what Will Smith had done, but by how the room responded to it. To Carrey, that standing ovation wasn't support. It was cowardice dressed up as celebration. He argued that Hollywood had openly revealed something it usually works very hard to conceal, that when one of its most profitable names crosses a line, the industry doesn't hold that person accountable. It closes ranks and protects its investment. Carrey went further and suggested that Chris Rock had every right to pursue legal action, pointing out that the footage existed permanently in public memory and would follow Rock's career and reputation for years to come. But what made Carrey's critique so striking wasn't just his anger. It was his understanding of why it happened. He described Will Smith as a man imprisoned by his own public image, a carefully constructed persona that he had spent his entire career building and defending. Carrey called it an avatar, a version of a person designed to appeal, inspire, and appear untouchable. And when that image felt threatened, even for a moment, Will reacted not as a free person, but as someone desperately protecting a carefully assembled illusion. Carrey wasn't just speaking about Will Smith. He was drawing on his own life. He had spoken publicly for years about his own spiritual journey and his realization that celebrity identity is a trap, a structure that keeps people locked inside a performance of themselves rather than letting them exist as real human beings. He once described his own persona as remarkably thin, questioning who exactly Jim Carrey was and whether that person truly existed at all. That kind of self-awareness gave his words enormous weight. He wasn't attacking Will Smith. He was describing a system, one that builds people up, rewards them for performing a version of themselves, and then leaves them so deeply attached to that performance that any perceived threat to it can feel like an existential crisis. The slap, in Carrey's view, wasn't the act of a man protecting his wife. It was the act of a man protecting his image. And Hollywood, rather than confronting that, chose to applaud it. Eddie Murphy brought a completely different energy to the same conversation, and it hit just as hard. Known for years as someone who openly dislikes award shows, calling them artificial and uncomfortable, Eddie chose the 2023 Golden Globes, one of the industry's most watched nights, to deliver a message that was brief, sharp, and impossible to misread. He told the audience to pay their taxes, mind their business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out of their mouths. The room laughed nervously, but everyone in that audience understood exactly what he meant. Murphy's perspective came from somewhere personal and hard-earned. Unlike Will Smith, who navigated Hollywood's approval system with extraordinary precision for decades, Eddie Murphy built his career by pushing against it. He resisted the roles the industry wanted him to play, refused to perform gratitude on cue, and paid real prices for that authenticity. At the 2007 Oscars, after losing the Best Supporting Actor award, rumors spread that he had stormed out in anger. The truth, which he only addressed years later, was far more dignified. He simply left quietly because he refused to sit there and be the sympathetic loser, performing disappointment for an audience. That, he said, was not who he was. His 1988 Oscars speech was an even sharper example. He stood on that stage and directly challenged the lack of black representation in the industry. The consequences were real. He was pushed aside. Opportunities were quietly closed, and his relationship with Hollywood's inner circle became permanently complicated. He did it anyway, because he understood something Will Smith never fully allowed himself to accept: that performing a public image on the industry's terms is a form of surrender, and that the cost of authenticity is sometimes severe but always worth it. When Eddie commented on the slap, he wasn't just making a joke. He was delivering a lesson from his own experience. He was saying, there's a smarter, more dignified, more honest way to move through this industry. You do not create public spectacles defending a version of your life that the public was never actually seeing clearly. And that point became even more pointed when Jada Pinkett Smith published her memoir in 2023 and revealed that she and Will had been living separately since 2016, years before the Oscars incident. The confrontation that shocked the world, the moment Will said he was defending his wife, happened within a relationship that had privately dissolved long before any of it took place. That revelation reframed everything. It introduced a new layer of performance, not just the celebrity personas on display that night, but the entire public presentation of their marriage that had been carefully maintained for public consumption. The professional fallout for Will Smith was immediate and lasting. He resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences on April 1st, 2022, and within days the institution imposed a 10-year ban on his attendance at any of their events. His film, Emancipation, which Apple Studios had invested $120 million in, and for which Will earned $35 million, was released in December 2022 to minimal promotion and a lukewarm response. Award season largely ignored it. The film that was positioned to be his next great Oscar moment became a quiet casualty of everything that had happened months before. His public likability score, which had reached an extraordinary 39 before the incident, placing him among the most recognized and well-regarded stars in the entire industry, dropped sharply, falling from 24 to 19 between mid-2022 and early 2024. Netflix canceled Fast and Loose, a project that had already been greenlit immediately after the incident. Studios that had never hesitated to attach his name to their biggest projects suddenly found reasons to wait. What Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy both understood, and what their responses made plain, is that this wasn't a story about one bad moment on a stage. It was a story about a system. Hollywood had protected Will Smith for years, not because of his character, but because of his box office numbers. Serious controversies and rumors that would have ended the careers of lesser-known actors barely left a mark on him. The industry managed narratives on his behalf, shielded him from scrutiny, and allowed him to exist inside a bubble of protection that most people in entertainment never get close to. The standing ovation the night of the incident was not an accident or an oversight. It was a reflex. The reflex of an industry that has always valued profitability over accountability, and that knows how to signal to its most valuable assets that even in their worst moments, they are still protected. Eddie Murphy's own experience illustrates how different that reality looks from the outside. When he spoke uncomfortable truths about representation, he was effectively sidelined. When Will Smith physically struck a comedian on live television, the room gave him a standing ovation. That contrast tells the entire story of how Hollywood's morality actually works, not as a fixed standard applied equally, but as a flexible calculation that depends entirely on how much revenue a person generates. The case of Janet Hubert, Will's original co-star on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, offers another clear illustration. After a contract dispute in the early 90s, she was labeled difficult and quietly removed from the industry's good graces while Will's team controlled the narrative and his star continued to rise. The industry made a choice about whose story it would tell and whose career it would prioritize, and that choice was never really about fairness. By early 2026, Will Smith's situation remained genuinely unresolved. The release of Bad Boys Ride or Die showed that audiences hadn't entirely walked away from him. Franchise familiarity carried the film to moderate success. But major studios continued to maintain cautious distance, and original projects with serious creative ambition had not come his way. A new legal challenge added to the uncertainty when Brian King Joseph, a violinist who toured with Smith during his 2025 concert tour, filed a lawsuit alleging that after reporting a deeply distressing incident in his hotel room involving threatening material, his concerns were dismissed by the team and he was abruptly terminated. Joseph claims the experience caused significant emotional and financial harm. Smith's legal team denied the allegations entirely and stated their intention to challenge every aspect of the case in court. Whether Will Smith finds a path back to the kind of career he had before that night remains genuinely uncertain. The audience hasn't fully closed the door, but the industry hasn't fully opened it back either. And what Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy made clear through their words is that real recovery, the kind that actually lasts, doesn't come from successful films alone. It comes from accountability. It comes from honesty. And it comes from the willingness to step out from behind the carefully constructed image and deal with consequences in the open, the way any person, famous or otherwise, eventually has to do. The story of what happened that night at the Oscars was never really just about a single act of aggression. It was about what that act revealed. About one man's relationship with his own public persona, about an industry that protects its investments before it upholds its stated values, and about the price every person eventually pays when the performance they've been maintaining finally breaks down in